Everyone in AI anticipated the lack of computing power. This is EconWorks. In this episode, we talk about how acknowledging the limitation wasn't sufficient. Execution, the speed at which businesses could deploy data center capacity at scale, has been the true differentiator. Scarcity characterizes the AI compute market, with building, permitting, and electricity serving as bottlenecks. The key competitive advantage is speed, not control, as this episode illustrates.
Right now, the smartest tech companies on Earth, they aren't fighting over the most advanced silicon chips anymore, or even, the best software engineers.
Right.
They are in this cutthroat trillion-dollar bidding war over something honestly much simpler. An empty warehouse with a high-voltage wall outlet.
Yeah, it really is a profound paradigm shift.
Right.
For years, the narrative was entirely about the microprocessors, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like who has the smallest nanometer architecture, or who can manufacture them the fastest. But that narrative is, it's completely outdated now.
Oh, totally.
Today, you can have a mountain of the most advanced AI chips in the world sitting in a warehouse, and they are absolutely useless if you can't physically plug them into the grid.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it completely subverts how you usually think about artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You picture, clean rooms, right? Engineers in protective suits and this sort of ethereal cloud where everything is invisible and frictionless.
Right, the cloud.
But today is June 15th, 2026, and our deep dive is going to prove that the real battleground for the future of AI is actually made of concrete, steel, and local power grids.
Yeah, the physical stuff.
Exactly. And we've got an incredible stack of sources today. It's anchored by this genuinely eye-opening report from EconWorks. It's titled, Competition in AI Compute is About Speed, Not Control.
It's a great report.
It really is. And we are also layering in some hard data from the International Energy Agency, plus real estate giants CBRE and JLL.
What's fascinating here is the overarching thesis we're exploring today. The binding constraint on AI development is it's no longer chip availability. It is infrastructure.
Right.
The speed of AI innovation is currently being bottlenecked by raw power generation, local permitting, and construction delays. We're essentially hitting the physical limits of the built world.
I gotta say, I want to quantify this infrastructure squeeze right out of the gate, because the numbers in the IEA report actually made me do a double take.
Oh, they're wild.
They really are. According to their data, global data center electricity consumption spiked from 270 terawatt hours in 2020 to 415 terawatt hours in 2024.
Yeah.
That is a massive 54% jump in just 4 years.
And when you just say the word terawatt hour, it can sound like a purely academic metric. Let's ground that.
Please do.
A single terawatt hour is a trillion watt hours.
Yeah.
So when we talk about an increase of 145 terawatt hours over just a 4-year period,
Which is a huge jump.
it is. We are literally talking about adding the electricity demand of the entire country of Argentina onto the global grid.
Wow, Argentina.
Yeah. And that massive surge in power generation is being requested almost entirely to support algorithms and data processing.
A whole nation's worth of power just dumped onto the existing infrastructure. And because of that, that ravenous demand, the real estate market for the buildings that actually house these servers is fundamentally broken.
Complete.
The CBRE and JLL reports show that a healthy commercial real estate market, whether you were talking about office buildings or traditional server farms, usually sits around, a 10 to 15% vacancy rate?
Exactly. Yeah, you need that buffer so companies can expand or move.
Right. But right now, the North American average for data center vacancy is 1.4%.
Which is essentially functional zero. There's no slack in the system whatsoever right now.
None.
If a new AI startup wants to rent space to train a model today, there's physically nowhere for them to go.
And in the really vital hubs, it gets even worse.
Yeah.
Take Northern Virginia, which is basically the physical capital of the internet, right? Because of how much fiber optic cable converges there.
The backbone of it all.
Yeah. The vacancy rate in Northern Virginia is 0.76%. A sub 1% vacancy rate isn't just a tight market, it's a market failure.
Yeah, it really is.
What happens to a smaller AI startup when the no vacancy sign is permanently lit?
Well, they stall out. The reason for this hyper-constrained environment comes down to the specific nature of the demand. Frontier AI workloads require a highly specialized type of physical space.
Right.
You can't just take, an abandoned big box retail store, throw some server racks in it, and call it an AI data center.
Because these new chips draw so much more power,
Yeah.
right? Exponentially more.
Power density is the critical factor here. Traditional cloud computing data centers were designed to handle maybe 5 to 10 kilowatts of power per server rack.
Okay.
But an AI training cluster, which requires packing tens of thousands of GPUs incredibly close together to minimize the time it takes for data to travel, that can demand 50 to 100 kilowatts per rack.
Oh, wow. That is 10 times the electrical current pumping into the exact same physical footprint.
Exactly. And when you draw that much power into that small of a space, the physical byproduct is an immense, dangerous amount of heat.
Right, of course.
So traditional data center air conditioning, which is essentially just blowing highly pressurized cold air up through the floorboards and down an aisle of servers, it simply cannot fight those physics.
The chips would just melt.
Literally melt.
Huh.
To train these frontier models, you need advanced, increasingly liquid-based cooling systems.
Wait, liquid cooling? Like pumping water directly over electronics that cost tens of thousands of dollars a piece. That sounds like an absolute insurance nightmare.
It does sound crazy, yeah.
How does that not just short-circuit the whole operation and burn the building down?
Well, it's not your standard tap water flowing through a garden hose, right? These systems use specially treated deionized fluids or engineered dielectric liquids flowing through closed-loop pipes directly onto the cold plates attached to the chips, because liquid is vastly more efficient at capturing and moving heat than air is.
That makes sense.
But outfitting a building with industrial-grade plumbing to cycle thousands of gallons of cooling fluid, that requires totally different architecture.
Which means this entire legacy infrastructure of older data centers, built in the 2010s, is essentially useless for modern AI.
Yeah, that is a crucial distinction made in the EconWorks report. Not all data centers are substitutable.
Right.
You have a distinct, hyper-constrained submarket for, well, AI-ready capacity. And because power is the ultimate constraint, you'll notice in the CBRE data that rents aren't priced by the square foot like a normal office building anymore.
Wait, how are they priced then?
They're priced by the kilowatt.
Oh, that's wild. And the rents are jumping from around $120 per kilowatt per month in 2019 to about $196 per kilowatt per month by the second quarter of 2025.
Well,
that is an explosive increase. But, this brings up a glaring economic question.
Sure.
In a normal capitalist system, when demand is this high, prices are surging, and customers are practically begging to hand you billions of dollars, it usually triggers an immediate building boom.
Right, supply and demand.
Exactly. So why isn't supply rising to meet this demand?
Because building a 100-megawatt AI-ready data center is not like manufacturing a smartphone or, writing a new software patch.
Okay.
You are interfacing with the heaviest, slowest, most heavily regulated parts of the physical world. The traditional timeline to build one of these facilities from scratch is upwards of 30 months.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting to me. The tech industry's entire identity is built on this ethos of moving fast and breaking things.
Right. Silicon Valley mantra.
Yeah. These companies push software updates daily. They iterate complex algorithms in real time. How are agile, trillion-dollar tech behemoths getting bogged down in 3-year 1950s-style construction timelines?
Well, you cannot code your way out of physics. And you certainly cannot code your way out of local bureaucracy.
Fair point.
Let's actually walk through the bottleneck gauntlet a company has to run to build one of these sites. The single biggest hurdle is grid access.
Oh.
If you want to build a data center that draws 500 megawatts, you can't just flip a switch. You have to enter what utilities call an interconnection queue.
Which means you are legally required to wait for the local power company to study if the regional grid can even handle your facility, right? Like, without browning out the local hospitals and neighborhoods.
Exactly. And those grid impact studies can take years. Utilities are heavily regulated, they're often understaffed, and they are operating power grids that were largely designed decades ago.
Wow.
And even if they approve your connection, you then have to source the physical equipment to step that high voltage power down to something your servers can actually use.
You're talking about the transformers and substations.
Yes, and these are not like off-the-shelf parts you buy from a catalog. A massive substation transformer is a house-sized piece of equipment.
House size?
Literally. It requires specialized electrical steel to manufacture, which is currently facing a massive global supply chain backlog. Ordering a custom transformer today often comes with a lead time of 18 to 24 months before it even ships.
Wait, really? So even with a blank checkbook, you are physically waiting 2 years just for the metal box that lets you connect to the power lines?
Yep. Then you layer on the permitting and siting constraints. You have to convince a local zoning board, often composed of local citizens concerned about noise and traffic, to let you build a humming, heavy industrial facility in their county.
Right, and NBSism.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You have to secure environmental permits. You have to negotiate massive water rights for those liquid cooling systems we just talked about.
And you still haven't even poured a single yard of concrete or, erected the steel framing, which comes with its own weather delays and labor shortages.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire timeline of global AI innovation, the absolute frontier of human technological progress, is currently tethered to the processing speed of local zoning boards.
Just mind-blowing.
Global steel shortages,
Yeah.
regional utility companies. The software is ready to run at the speed of light, but the hardware is stuck in a 3-year traffic jam.
But I mean, human nature dictates that if everyone is stuck in the exact same traffic jam, eventually someone is going to figure out how to drive off-road.
Oh, absolutely.
And that leads us directly to the massive anomaly highlighted in the EconWorks sources, XAI's Colossus project.
Yeah. Colossus is the defining case study of this current market cycle. It completely shattered every accepted industry timeline we just discussed.
The numbers are frankly hard to believe. They deployed 100,000 GPUs in just 122 days.
Unheard of.
And then they scaled it up to 200,000 GPUs roughly 90 days after that. So we are talking about 200 days total.
Yeah.
That's like deciding to build a towering, state-of-the-art skyscraper and cutting the ribbon on opening day less than 4 months later.
It's wild.
30 months of bureaucracy and construction compressed down to a little over 6. How is that physically possible when everyone else is waiting 2 years just for a transformer?
By fundamentally changing the rules of engagement with physical infrastructure.
Okay.
They bypassed the traditional utility bottleneck almost entirely. Instead of buying an empty field and waiting years in an interconnection queue for grid access, they took over an existing industrial site that already had some baseline infrastructure. But more importantly, they implemented their own on-site power generation.
Wait, they just brought their own power plant?
Essentially, yes.
I need to understand the mechanics of this because it sounds insane. How do you just stand up a power plant in a few months?
It requires extreme brute force. They brought in mobile gas turbines, which are essentially jet engines attached to electrical generators, and massive modular battery storage units.
Jet engines.
Yeah. Instead of relying on a utility company to build transmission lines to their site, they essentially became an independent power producer overnight, burning natural gas on site to generate the massive megawattage required to spin up those 100,000 GPUs.
But the logistics of that, you have to secure a constant, massive supply of natural gas, manage the extreme noise and heat of running industrial turbines right next to your servers, and coordinate thousands of contractors working around the clock.
Which is why the EconWorks report really highlights their aggressive, highly centralized project management. They ran parallel work streams, integrating the concrete pouring, the plumbing, and the server racking simultaneously rather than sequentially. Combine that with the brute force physical solution of off-grid power, and you bypass the local utility gridlock entirely.
I gotta be honest, I struggle to buy that pure execution speed is the only difference here. I mean, look at every major hyperscaler. The Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world.
Sure.
They have infinite money, the most sophisticated logistics networks on Earth, and entire divisions dedicated to forecasting demand. You're telling me they saw this compute shortage coming, but they just didn't think to buy gas turbines?
Well, it's less about a lack of imagination and more about institutional risk aversion.
Okay, what do you mean?
The major hyperscalers operate massive, globally standardized fleets of data centers. They have strict corporate sustainability goals, deeply entrenched supply chain protocols, and shareholders who expect predictable, standardized capital expenditures.
Oh, I see.
Hauling noisy, carbon-emitting gas turbines onto a site and running unproven parallel construction workflows is a massive operational risk.
So a legacy tech giant isn't going to risk a highly publicized environmental backlash or a catastrophic site failure, whereas a younger, privately held entity with a startup mentality can absorb that risk to buy speed.
Exactly. Every major player saw the same demand curves. They all knew the grid was a bottleneck.
Right.
But while the hyperscalers were waiting for grid studies and navigating traditional procurement cycles to build permanent, polished facilities, XAI executed a messy, brute force alternative.
Wait, but if XAI is buying up private gas turbines and essentially building their own private infrastructure off the grid because they can absorb that risk and cost, doesn't that lock out everyone else?
How so?
Well, if you're a mid-sized AI developer, you can't afford to buy a literal power plant to train your model. Are we watching the birth of a new monopoly where whoever builds the biggest brute force infrastructure the fastest just dictates the future?
So, that exact fear is what typically drives standard antitrust and market competition discussions.
Naturally.
The historical framework we use to understand monopolies focuses heavily on vertical integration. The idea that a massive company will build out all this underlying capacity, hoard it for themselves, and strategically withhold access to crush any smaller rivals.
Right, the classic build a moat and pull up the drawbridge strategy.
Exactly. But the Econ Works report argues that applying that standard 20th century antitrust theory to today's AI compute market is fundamentally flawed.
Really? Why?
The real limit in the system right now is not the discretionary withholding of existing capacity by greedy tech giants. The dominant constraint is the agonizingly slow creation of new capacity.
Because the vacancy rate is 1.4%.
Exactly.
Even if a massive tech giant wanted to play nice and share their servers, there is physically nothing to share. The power isn't there.
Precisely. Even if a firm had the malicious incentive to restrict access to their data centers, the broader structural shortage of electricity and physical space remains the binding factor.
Right.
In a market this starved for supply, rapid expansion, even if it's executed by a single massive player, is inherently pro-competitive. When a company rapidly deploys massive new infrastructure, it increases the total market supply of compute.
So what does this all mean? It's like the early railroad days.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be punishing the company laying down tracks the fastest for having a monopoly on their specific route. We should be cheering that someone is finally expanding the rail network so goods can actually move.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because ultimately, it's not about hoarding the pie. It's about whoever can bake new pies the fastest, which leaves more pie for everyone. Building massive new capacity often means leasing out the excess processing power to third parties, which relieves that intense price pressure we saw with rents spiking to $196 a kilowatt.
Exactly. It leaves more compute available for everyone in the wider ecosystem. And this raises an important question regarding how regulators and policymakers should react to this new reality.
Oh, for sure.
The synthesis of this deep dive is that policy discussions in Washington and Brussels are often chasing the ghosts of market exclusion based on old industrial realities. They're worried about who owns the servers.
When they should really be worried about how to approve power substations faster.
Exactly. If you want a healthy, competitive, accessible AI ecosystem, the policy focus urgently needs to shift toward relaxing the true bottlenecks. We need comprehensive permitting reform. We need aggressive expansion of the electrical grid.
Yeah.
The defining feature of AI compute competition today is execution, not control. Firms that figure out how to build and deploy physical capacity fastest expand the total supply, lower price pressure, and enable more innovation downstream.
That totally reframes the daily news. I mean, when you read headlines about AI chip wars or algorithm breakthroughs, it's so easy to get caught up in the digital illusion that everything is just happening in the ether. But this completely grounds it.
It forces us to remember that the digital world is entirely dependent on the physical one. The limiting factor on the future of artificial intelligence isn't silicon design. It's the speed of pouring concrete and laying high-voltage cables.
So to recap the incredible arc we've covered today, we started with that staggering 54% spike in global data center energy demand, effectively plugging an entire nation's worth of electricity needs into the grid in just 4 years.
Huge numbers.
We saw how that demand completely drained the commercial real estate market, leaving us with a functional zero vacancy rate and skyrocketing rents driven by the massive power density and liquid cooling requirements of these new chips.
Right.
We broke down the 30-month bottleneck gauntlet of grid interconnection studies and specialized transformer shortages. We analyzed how XAI bypassed that entire sluggish system using brute force off-grid gas turbines to stand up 100,000 GPUs in just 122 days.
Yeah.
And finally, we unpacked why, in a structurally undersupplied market, sheer execution speed is actually the ultimate pro-competitive force.
It really is a complete inversion of how we usually think about technology scaling. Software development has returned to the era of massive, heavy industrial infrastructure projects.
So for you, listening right now, the next time you hear about a revolutionary new AI model that can write a symphony or discover a new drug or optimize a global supply chain, don't just picture glowing lines of code or tiny microchips floating in a sterile clean room.
Definitely not.
You should picture the thousands of tons of steel framing, the intricate miles of liquid cooling pipes, and the local power grids straining under the massive electrical load that made that digital breakthrough physically possible. You now have a mechanical lens to understand the tech industry that most people completely miss.
The heavy, physical foundation of the virtual world.
But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. If the only way to truly win the AI race today is to bypass the traditional power grid entirely, buying up old industrial sites, bringing in massive natural gas pipelines, and firing up private turbines just to get the juice you need, what does the future look like a decade from now?
Good question.
Will these trillion-dollar tech companies essentially have to become their own sovereign utility providers? And what happens when the infinite exponential demands of the virtual world start openly competing with our physical cities for the most basic finite resources of land, water, and electricity?
It's a collision course between the limitless ambition of the digital future and the stubborn limits of our physical reality.
It really is. Well, thank you so much for joining us as we unpacked the hidden architecture of the AI revolution. It turns out the pristine, microscopic world of silicon is entirely dependent on the heavy, messy world of concrete. Stay curious, keep looking past the surface, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Econ Works. The goal of this series is to move beyond the surface-level descriptions of how markets work and start looking at the actual architecture of competition. We'll be back soon with another look at where the law and economics meet the market. For the full technical analysis and more from this series, visit us at econworks.com. If you found today's breakdown valuable, please subscribe and share the show. It helps us keep the analysis independent. From all of us here at Econ Works, thanks for listening.